many family-owned businesses survive into the fourth generation. Under Dale Bachman's leadership, the company that his great-grandparents, Henry and Hattie Bachman, started in 1885 expanded and thrived. Bachman's had already been through several iterations. Henry and Hattie had grown and sold vegetables, and they were skeptical of their son Albert's 1914 decision to grow carnations. When Dale was growing up in the 1950s, his father had taken over the business and was operating 4 floral shops, a greenhouse, and a string of kiosks. Dale, who was graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1972 with a degree in plant and soil science, drew up a business plan that gave the company a new profit center, Bachman's Nursery Wholesale Center, which began selling plants to landscape firms throughout the region. He became president of the company in 1992. That year, the company spun off Department 56, the $165 million in revenue importer of gifts and collectible items, and began to look for new ways to expand. It has since added a 629-acre growing facility in Lakeville, operations in landscape design and installation, and commercial and special event floral sales. There are also 6 Twin Cities area Bachman's Floral Home and Garden Centers, which offer plants and cut flowers, plant care products and tools, home decor items, and casual furniture. The company employs approximately 1,100 people throughout the year and adds an additional 500 seasonal employees every spring and late fall. Every year, the company plants and harvests some 20,000 trees. The company has not stopped innovating. Last year, Dale Bachman brought in a French-born restaurateur to create Patrick's French Bakery and Cafe. And in May, it opened the Cedar Acres Garden and Landscape Center in Lakeville, 3 times the size of its other retail centers. On the floral side of the business alone, says Bachman, we are helping people celebrate some of the most important occasions that you can have in life. And it's an honor to be entrusted with that opportunity. Jim Campbell didn't want to be a banker. His father was a banker, and Jim regarded banking as too regulated, too predictable. He was a would-be engineer with a management degree. He was ready to help Ford build cars. But it made sense for his wife Carmen to take a teaching job in Minnesota, and he had an offer to become a credit analyst for the august Northwestern National Bank of Minneapolis. And that became where he began a lifelong career of business achievement and community service. At 30, he was asked to run Northwestern's new equipment leasing subsidiary. 4 years later, he was heading the bank's national division, managing relationships with Fortune 500 companies. In 1979, a year before Congress passed legislation that would deregulate interest rates and much of banking itself, Campbell was asked to head the company's Nebraska operations, which he consolidated. Returning to Minneapolis in 1984, he combined banks and centralized staff and line operations, eliminating decades of internal competition and introducing enormous operating efficiencies. During Campbell's tenure, the assets of Minnesota banks based with the Northwest Wells Fargo system grew from $5.9 billion, spread among 48 separately chartered banks, to $52 billion within the 166 branches of a single, centrally run institution. Credit quality improved, as did every key measure of banking performance. In 1998, Norwest was taken over by San Francisco-based Wells Fargo, now the 4th largest banking company in the nation, and Campbell became chairman of Wells Fargo Bank, Minnesota, a position from which he fought to preserve a strong measure of autonomy for the company's Minnesota-based institutions. Marketing and government relations remained in the Twin Cities. So did sales, service, community relations, and a sense that Wells Fargo was part of the Minnesota community. Upon retiring in 2001, Campbell continued to serve on corporate and foundation boards, and he found time to head the Itasca Project, where he became the advocate for growth-friendly changes in public policy. Earlier this year, he agreed to serve as co-dean of the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. I grew up with a kind of a civic agenda, he says. In the banking family in which he grew up, there was this commitment to more than just the family and the business. It was to the community. Few businesses have helped add value to the products of Minnesota farms as much as Fagan Incorporated of Granite Falls, a company whose modest headquarters on Highway 212 is next to the only stoplight in Yellow Medicine County. Don't be fooled by appearances. Although only 100 Fagan employees work at the company's headquarters, the company has licensed engineers in 37 states and Canada, and it employs more than 1,400 construction workers. Its fiscal 2004 sales were $315 million. CEO Ron Fagan expects to record sales of $375 million this year and perhaps $500 million next year. The company, which Ron Fagan incorporated in 1988, has designed and built flour mills, meat packing facilities, and corn, soybean, and sugar beet processing plants throughout the Midwest. It has built power plants in Iowa, Nebraska, and Virginia, a salt mining facility in Louisiana, a fish farming facility in Minnesota, and at least one sheriff's office. It has also built the infrastructure of the ethanol industry. Of the approximately 90 ethanol plants operating throughout the United States, Fagan has built more than 50, including all but one of the ethanol plants operating in Minnesota. It will complete about 12 ethanol plants this year, and those plants have become increasingly efficient. Fagan and a partner firm have implemented design improvements and have reduced the cost of producing a gallon of ethanol by more than 70%. Ron Fagan, the son of a Maynard, Minnesota cattle buyer, learned about construction and road building as a combat engineer in Vietnam. Fresh from the service, he co-founded a road building company from which he took no salary for 2 years, but which helped build Interstate 90. He is especially pleased to have his wife, daughter, and 2 sons in business with him. He is a firm believer in the ethanol industry that he has helped build. He notes that ethanol helps farmers by raising the price they receive for corn, reduces fuel emissions, and addresses our dependence on oil. I'll believe we have enough ethanol, he says, when I see the last oil tanker coming out of the Mideast. Bob Curlin grew up working. At 7, he swept the floors of his father's auto parts store for 5 cents an hour. At 11, he moved up to the counter work. After college and the Peace Corps, while he was still in his 20s, he and 4 friends opened a cash-strapped hardware store where they sold nuts, bolts, screws, and other fasteners. At the time, it might have been the smallest of about 10,000 companies selling fasteners. It's now the largest. Started in a tiny Winona storefront 40 years ago, Fastenal now operates 1,600 stores in the United States, Mexico, Canada, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, the Netherlands, and Singapore. It employs 7,000 people, operates 12 distribution centers, operates a fleet of 3,500 delivery trucks, and sells 350,000 kinds of screws, nuts, specialty fasteners, chemicals, paints, building handling equipment, and electrical supplies. Last year, its sales rose 20% to $1.2 billion. It has been celebrated in Inc. magazine and named 8 times to Forbes magazine's list of America's best small companies. Bob Curlin, Fastenal's chairman, served as CEO until late 2001, when he decided to devote more time to his duties as a Minnesota state senator representing his hometown. As CEO, he developed a reputation for intense frugality, for buying used office furniture and distributing homemade scratch paper pads. He explained often that the less the company spent, the more cash it could put into inventories and new outlets. He extended his careful spending to himself. As CEO, he never took more than his $120,000 in annual salary. Frugal does not mean ungenerous. 6 years ago, Fastenal augmented its employee profit-sharing program with a stock option plan that has made half of Fastenal's employees shareholders. In Winona, Fastenal's managers and employees are known for their generous community spirit. The Hiawatha Foundation, which was established by Fastenal's founders but has since become Curlin's family foundation, has been a strong supporter of education. We would not say that a corporation has a responsibility to a community, says Curlin, but we do say that the people who make up the corporation do. Ken Melrose became the chief executive of the Toro Company in 1983 amid widespread doubts that the company could survive. 2 years of warm winters and hot, dry summers had already sapped demand for Toro's snowblowers and lawnmowers when the economy entered the worst recession since World War II. The situation called for dramatic measures, and Melrose initiated them. He cut executive perks, tightened spending, and reduced the Toro workforce from 4,200 employees to 1,800. The turnaround that he led wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast. The company lost money for 3 straight years, and Melrose says that it took most of the 1980s to reestablish Toro's reputation as a growing company. In the long run, however, the results proved to be spectacular. During his 22 years as CEO, Toro sales grew from $250 million to $1.7 billion, a compound rate of 9.3% a year. Profits climbed by 13% a year. By the time Melrose retired as CEO last spring, the price of Toro stock had raised 25-fold in 22 years. He had also changed the culture of the company. As soon as Toro had become financially stable, Melrose initiated a continuous improvement program called Pride and Excellence. Working with management gurus Steve Covey and Tom Peters, he altered forever Toro's top-down management style. As he explains, "I wanted to create a culture in which management sees employees as its most important constituents, with the understanding that the shareholders will ultimately be rewarded." Under Melrose's leadership in the 1990s, Toro radically altered its product portfolio. In the early 1980s, 2/3 of the company's sales were in its consumer division, which was vulnerable to economic downturns. Today, 2/3 of Toro's revenues come from the less cyclical and more profitable professional division, which includes mowers and irrigation equipment for golf courses and sports fields. How do you bring about change? The answer, says Melrose, is patience and longevity. Changing a corporate culture is a marathon. For us, it took at least 10 years, which means you have to be willing to be CEO for 10 years. It doesn't work if you aren't in it for the long haul.